Making a skull in Blender. A few things I want to say before getting started. First thing being that this is not a beginner tutorial, so if you're still learning Blender, getting familiar with the controls, etc., I recommend watching a beginner tutorial first, like the donut tutorials from Blender Guru, for example. Also, this is basically a whole workflow tutorial, so I'm not only gonna show you how to sculpt a skull, but to also do retopology and texturing and also baking at the end. So you can apply this to other stuff you might want to sculpt in the future. Alright, to get started we just need a cube and some reference. I really want to make this clear that good photo reference, mostly photo reference, is really helpful in getting good results. So I have a software called PureRef and I use it to load a bunch of photos into that to then keep looking at it while I'm sculpting. Additionally, I also have a skull open in Sketchfab, which is a photo scanned skull of a real human. And I'll leave links to that in the description so you can look at that as well. So throughout the sculpting process I'm gonna keep looking at this reference, so I highly recommend you do the same. Alright, so to get started I'm just gonna subdivide this cube. I'm just gonna subdivide it, I don't know, a bunch of times, like 6 times. And looking at this in wireframe mode, we want to get this to the point where there's a bunch of geometry for the sculpting brushes to actually work with. So I'm gonna also, by the way, if I'm struggling a bit, this is because I'm using Blender 5.0 and they changed a bunch of UI stuff. So it's almost like I'm also struggling with Blender, even though this is just UI changes. So it might also look a bit different for you if you're still using an older version of Blender. So I want to remesh this to the point where we're around, like, I don't know, maybe like 300,000 faces. By the way, if you want to get this view down here, this is something you can enable in the settings. I found this really helpful for just analyzing my workflow or my geometry. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. I'm gonna just turn it down a bit more. Let's say to like 7 maybe, there you go. Actually, to get started, I'm gonna make it a bit lower poly at first. Alright, so I'm just gonna apply these two things. I'm just gonna shade it smooth already. Alright, let's get going then. Scope mode, and so firstly I'm gonna just change the brush sizes to follow the scene, both these things, and I'm also going to enable mirror down here in symmetry, and this is going to be an X mirror. Actually, yeah, it's going to be X. Okay, I'm just going to hide this up here so we get a nice view. Right, so I'm just going to focus on the basic shapes of what a skull has. By the way, I'm also gonna, for some reason, every time you open Blender, this switches back to view automatically. It doesn't seem like you can save this in any way, which is kind of a shame. I wish they would let you do that, but hey, there you go. Right, I'm just gonna make like 2 eye sockets. I'm also gonna move some things around here, just to get started, just to get the basic shapes going. By the way, don't worry if it looks weird to you at first. This is just how it starts. Like, you gotta first make it ugly to make it look beautiful later. I suppose that's how you could say it. So yeah, I'm just gonna start dragging around a bit. So this is gonna be the upper jaw down here, and I know this looks this looks interesting right now, but this is all gonna change. Alright, so there's gonna be a nose here, and something like that. I'm just gonna drag some stuff around here. This drag brush is really helpful at first to just set the proportions of things. So the eyes still look ridiculous. I'm gonna just... By the way, I might actually speed up a few parts later in the video, because this is gonna take a few hours and I don't wanna make you fall asleep watching like a multiple hour video, if you're even gonna watch all this. By the way, if you do watch all of it, thank you. watch time seems to really help people on YouTube, so I appreciate if you do. Also feel free to leave a like and all that. I really don't even want to say it, I don't want to be this classic YouTuber, but if you do, thank you. Alright, so the eyes still look a bit weird, let's see. Okay, I'm just gonna get started with a nose here. Before I do that. So I'm really just focusing on overall proportions right now. Also, you know, setting the basic shapes, like the nose and the eyes, just to get started. Can tweak it later, just so there's something there already, basically. His face still looks pretty flat right now. And as I said earlier, I'm gonna keep looking at the reference from all kinds of different angles, just to get, you know, to see, have a look at the shapes and to match them, basically. Actually starting to like the nose shape already, even though, I mean, this looks nothing like a realistic skull just yet, but it's gonna. It's gonna. Just takes a while. By the way, if you don't have a second monitor, I can also recommend using your phone as a second screen for a reference. Again, this really helps with getting nice results. I basically look at the reference half of the time, like I keep looking over to my left where my second monitor is. This is really helpful. It's kind of looking a bit Neanderthal-like. It's like, it looks a bit ancient, maybe not as much like a modern human skull right now. But that'll change. I think that's mostly the fact that the rims of the eyes are still pretty thick, which is how ancient skulls usually look like. So I'm gonna get that a bit thinner on the edges here. I've noticed that even in skulls, humans are really good at distinguishing between faces, and I've noticed that that's even the case, for me at least, with skulls. Like the eyes especially can change the look of a skull like a lot. So I like to focus on the eyes a bit more than anything else maybe. I just noticed that I basically didn't explain much about the brushes. There's kind of 3 main brushes I'm using for the most part, which is just draw. I know a lot of people like to use clay and stuff, but I'm just fine with using draw, as well as smooth and the elastic grab. So those are really the 3 main ones I'm using. Maybe also a bit of inflate later, and then maybe, you know, the odd one aside from that. But it's really just these main 3, and then that's basically it. Again, I'm kind of focusing still on like bigger-ish details, but kind of getting into some details, I guess. But you know, keeping it general at first, just moving things around with the elastic grab until you sort of like the proportions. Alright, I'm just gonna go ahead and go back to object mode, and I'm gonna make some Boolean shapes now. I know there's another way to cut shapes into, or cut holes into sculpted objects, but I like to do it with Geo in object mode. So I'm just gonna make a shape to cut some holes, or make multiple shapes actually. Oh yeah, they changed this too in 5.0. There's adaptive subdivision now, which is no longer experimental. So go Blender developers. Alright. So I want to get a shape going roughly. Like a weird blob shape, like that. By the way, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, I'm not using a like a tablet or a pen for sculpting. I always found it to be alright to use a mouse. The main thing that helps me with that, I think, is that I turn down the sensitivity a lot. Like the translation is almost 1:1, so it almost feels like a pen just because my sensitivity is so low. So if you're thinking about getting a pen, I can actually recommend trying just the mouse at first. See how it works for you. I've been doing it for years, and I definitely get along with it. So I know people usually recommend getting a pen when you sculpt a lot, but I don't find it that necessary. Okay, I'm just gonna apply all transform for this object, and I'm gonna mirror it too to get it on both sides. And then I'm gonna set a Boolean modifier to the skull and pick this object. This might take a few seconds for you. Alright, just hiding that Boolean object, and now we have a hole here, which is what a real skull also has. So I could also go ahead and punch a hole right there in this eye socket, which is what actual skulls also have. But I think for the simplicity of this tutorial, I'm not gonna do that, because it can get pretty complex. There are so many holes in skulls, and I'm just gonna focus on the 2 main ones that I usually do, which is the nose and this hole I just made on the side here. By the way, I'm also just gonna apply this already. And I'm just gonna make another one with another subdivision, just like that. I'm noticing that the nose is pretty narrow. I'm just gonna make that a bit wider first in sculpt mode, just a bit to get going here. Okay, going back to object mode, going to edit mode. And I want to match this shape here roughly. to make a nose hole. Actually, before I do that, I'm kind of jumping ahead here. I'm sorry for that. That's totally on me. Before I do that, I want to get a bit more of a hole here, or a bit more of a lack of stuff up here. That's what real skulls also have, and it's gonna be where the nose hole ends up, back here. Roughly there. By the way, this part of a human skull is always a mess. There's all kinds of bumps and stuff going on down here. I'm probably not even gonna end up making all that in this tutorial, because this is just a mess down here. And this is not even where people usually look at when they look at skulls. It's mostly just the face, right? So I'm gonna keep it simple down here is what I'm saying. I'm just gonna move this up a bit more. Maybe like that. Okay. So, moving on with this. I'm just gonna extrude this down through here. Get it a bit smaller maybe. And just make it go through here. Like that. This is still not quite as high as I wanted. I'm just gonna go back to sculpt mode after selecting the skull. And right, this is gonna be fine. So I'm gonna apply the subdivision. Apply all transforms and get a mirror going again. Just make sure this doesn't merge. This shouldn't touch in the middle anyway. Apply that and just fill this up. And do another boolean on the skull, choosing this object. And there you go, we made some nose holes. And I'm gonna apply that too. And after that, it's a good idea to do remeshing, because even though the Boolean object had a pretty high poly count, the geo still got pretty messed up by doing that. What did I do earlier? Like 007. I did less, didn't I? Let me do... I think I did 1, right? That's totally fine for now still. Okay. Now, moving on. By the way, let me just shade the smooth again. Going back to Sculpting. If I'm not explaining as much right now, this is basically my first tutorial, so bear with me. I'm doing my best. I've been playing with the idea of making a tutorial like this for a while, and thought I would finally do it now. Tweaking some shapes along the nose. This look a bit more interesting here. Cool. I'm liking where it's going. I hope you are too. Hope you're getting along nicely. I know it can be tricky at first. I'm also working pretty fast, I think, so if it's a bit too fast for you, sorry about that. Take your time, is what I'm saying. Like, I know it can be easy to get frustrated and freak out. I've been there so many times too. If you just take your time and, you know, relax, it's gonna get a bit easier, I suppose. Alright, I'm just gonna make this hole even bigger. There's always a massive cavity back here behind the eye sockets. And there's usually a blob right here. So there isn't much to explain right now. I'm basically just looking at the reference again and again, adjusting what I think needs adjusting to the point where I like it. I'm still focusing on pretty big shapes. Later this is gonna get more into detail, but for now I'm just focusing on, I suppose, like medium details. I did the bigger shapes first, and now I'm like moving on to smaller-ish stuff. And later it's gonna get even more into detail, so building up the layers of detail, basically. Alright, I'm just gonna make some adjustments to the eye sockets here. So this is where there would be another hole. This hole would basically go through here and come out somewhere here. So go through this eye socket down here. But again, I'm not gonna do it for this tutorial. I'm just gonna fake it, basically. I'm gonna give an indication of it. I'm gonna just make a little dip here. Little crevice. So there's basically a bunch of holes back in the eye sockets, which you might not even see on some skulls because they're so broken back there, at least on older skulls, but there's just a bunch of messy stuff going on inside the eyes, so that's what I'm doing right now. Not focusing on anatomy necessarily, but just doing stuff to the point where I like it. I think that looks pretty good already. Just punching some holes basically with the brush. I'm gonna work on the eyes a bit more, give it a bit of character. So maybe lift this up and make it a bit less uniform around the eyes. Also, a lot of skulls, I've noticed that not all skulls have this, but a lot of them have like a little hole here. I don't know if it depends on genetics or just growth, but I usually like this dimple here, or this little hole that a lot of people have. I'm gonna just make that happen here. Just a bit. I know this is already getting into details, but I thought I would mention it now, and I'm just gonna add that in. because this is a nice detail. It's kind of like eyebrows, even though not really, but this definitely can give character to a skull. Make it look sort of unique, I guess. Alright, I'm pretty happy with how it's going already. By the way, if you're struggling, take a moment to sit back and look at the skull, compare it to the reference, and just see what you don't like. I know it can be easy to like get bogged down, and especially as a beginner. I know how I used to feel when I got started. But you could do this. It's definitely possible. It's more than possible. You can do it. So I'm just gonna thin down this part. I'm using this pinch brush now to thin down this nose at least. Maybe some other parts too. Maybe a bit this here. And again, just comparing to the reference, comparing with the reference to see what I want to change. I'm gonna start making some holes for the teeth already. By the way, I'm not gonna make that lower jaw. I'm just gonna focus on the skull itself. But of course, if you want to make a lower jaw as well, feel free to do it. It would basically be the same process. I would probably make a just a shape that already resembles the skull in edit mode, and then just sculpt on top of that. But I've actually never made a lower jaw. I've always focused on just the main skull part itself. Right. So let me just count. I keep forgetting how many teeth a human has up there. So it's per side. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is what I'm counting right now. So I'm gonna let me recount. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes. Okay. So this is gonna be number 1. Number 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, the space is getting a bit tight here. Let me just redo that then. It's pretty tight up here where the teeth are. They're pretty close together. Almost touching. The walls in between are pretty thin. There's usually, or pretty much always, another shape behind the last tooth. It's pretty much always like another blob back here. The words are evading me right now because I'm focused on sculpting. And making a somewhat compelling video. I hope I'm doing alright with that. I hope you're not completely annoyed by me. Gonna change a few things. So also, I suppose this is getting a bit stylized. I'm gonna just make some ridges here, which a lot of skulls might not even have, but to make things look interesting, I'm gonna introduce some ridges here, some ridges, I guess, some bumps where the roots of the teeth are. Do a ridge here. Turn this back a bit too, maybe. Make that happen more back here. I know I just keep saying this and that, but when I'm saying that, I'm referring to the shapes that I'm making. I'm sure you get it. If you don't, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best. I hope me just showing you the process helps at least somewhat. And I hope you can follow along somewhat. Somewhat alright. Again, if you struggle, you know, just sit back for a moment and just look at what you want to change. And then change it. Always comparing to the reference. That's what I'm doing all the time. Half the time my eyes are on the other screen looking at the reference. I know I keep saying that, but it really helps. Focusing on the part that you're looking at in the reference, changing it on your skull. Now I'm like kind of introducing some character to the skull, making it look unique, not as generic maybe. Just by, you know, exaggerating some or enhancing some shapes that I like. So, for example, getting the cheekbones further out, or, you know, tweaking. A big thing is tweaking the shape of the eyes. Can make him look more sad or more angry by doing that. Give him character. By the way, by holding control, I know I said this isn't a beginner tutorial about controls, but yeah, by pressing control, speaking of control, on your keyboard, you can invert the brush. So adding or subtracting with every brush by holding down control. At least that's how my keyboard layout is. I know I'm still using an old keyboard layout, because I've been using Blender since 2.79, so I'm still selecting with right click as well. Moving with middle mouse. It might be completely different for you, I'm not sure how the controls are these days for people. I know that a lot of people switch to selecting with left click, but I just like how it used to be in Blender, so I'm still doing it the way it used to be. one advice I can give is don't try to be tidy, or don't try to be accurate, I guess. I do my best to be messy when I sculpt, so just like throw around the brush and, you know, I mean, it depends on what you're doing. If you're working on like tiny detail, then it can be a good idea to be somewhat more precise, but you know, art is usually pretty messy. I mean, it depends on the art style too, but you know, for things like sculpting, I think it can be a good idea to just, you know, just throw around the brush. Don't try to be too exact about what you're doing. That can lead to some interesting shapes. And by the way, don't take anything or any advice I give you too serious. I'm kind of just speaking off my mind right now and telling you what works well for me. What I've learned over doing, what I've learned with, let me say that again. What I've learned while doing Blender for 10 years is that developing your own workflow and ways of working can also really help. Of course, people can help a lot with teaching you stuff, but you know, developing your own ways can also be a thing. By the way, when you're smoothing shapes out, like these lines I made right here, it can be a good idea to look at what you're smoothing out while you're smoothing it. So I know, for example, that the end of these lines I want to smooth right now, but this stuff down here might actually look good. Like this might look like some nice detail. I just want to smooth, in this case I just want to smooth the ends of the strokes that I've made, and maybe just a bit of the other ends too. So look at what you're doing while you're doing it, I suppose is how you could say it, is like, if you're smoothing, pay attention to how and what you're smoothing. Same with on a ridge like this here. I'm not gonna go over this ridge with the smooth brush, just like smooth it out completely. That's not gonna help much. But for example, I'm seeing this line here, and I could say, okay, I just want to smooth out. I just want to smooth out this part here. So pay attention to what you're smoothing when you're doing it. As you might have noticed, I'm moving more towards like detailed stuff now. So this is kind of like organically happening as I'm sculpting. Getting more and more into detail. And in a minute I'm gonna probably do another remesh modifier to then do some extra detail on top of that. Right, I'm not talking much, I'm just tweaking shapes. Adjusting what I think needs adjusting again. I mean, you know, just seeing what I like and what I don't like. And changing what I don't like. Alright, I'm just gonna have a quick look at this in Eevee. Just to see how it looks like semi-shaded. Just as a little preview of how it might look like later. I'm honestly pretty happy with that already. Yeah, I am. I'm just gonna do another step now, which is I'm gonna remesh that again. By the way, just really quick, I'm just gonna, okay. Alright, I'm just gonna remesh that again with a higher poly count this time to focus more on detail. So this will be what we had before. I'm gonna just switch to maybe half that. Let's see. I'll shape that smooth here. Look at 1.1 million. Alright, the detail of that. So I'm actually looking at the geo, thinking how much detail can I get out of this geo right now, out of this poly count. So thinking about that, this should be alright for what I want, because I'm gonna sculpt some very fine detail in a minute, and I want enough geometry for that to be possible in sculpt mode. So This is looking pretty good. I'm just gonna go with that. Yes, I'm just gonna apply that. Okay. One thing you can also do is look at shadow and cavity. Get a bit of an approximation of how it might look like later when it has a material. So what I'm gonna do now is keep the brush at a small size. Something around there, probably maybe a bit smaller. Let's say something around 0.25 maybe. Maybe even smaller, because I'm gonna tweak the odd thing that I want to add. I'm just gonna turn these things back off. And what I'm gonna do now is just enhance the shapes, enhance the edges of shapes. So I'm gonna go around and, for example, do this here, where I'm just gonna go around the edges of things, of shapes of the skull, to just enhance them like that. That really helps make it look nice, from my experience anyway. So just to add like small stuff, basically. But then at the same time, looking at the reference still to compare what real skulls have, where the real skulls have that kind of edge detail. So there's not literally applied everywhere, but where it makes sense also relative to the reference. And then later I'm still gonna smooth this down, but for now I'm just gonna sort of splatter this all around the model. What I'm gonna do next is suture lines. So skulls have these like connecting plates, so I'm gonna make that happen now. So for that I'm gonna actually change the fall off of this brush here. So I'm gonna set that to maybe sphere, and I'm gonna make the brush a lot smaller. So I'm gonna set it to like I don't know. Oops. Set it to like 0.02 again, maybe. Let's have a look. Way smaller than that yet again. So maybe 1. Just keep looking at the reference to match that, to roughly match the thickness of those lines. So something like that. And if I increase the size by a lot, then get these lines, make that a bit wider. So that 4 star is pretty good. So I'm just gonna go around the model now and make these lines happen. So they go like around here, and I'm just wiggling the brush a lot to make them a bit less uniform. So they kind of come around here, and they would connect in this hole that I talked about earlier, and they would meet up in the middle, but again, we're not doing that for this tutorial. Now I'm gonna turn off the mirror to get them looking a bit different on each side here. There is one like across the nose here. It's kind of here. I already made like a little indent earlier. I'm gonna just connect that in here, and then I'm gonna have it lose itself in a hole back there. So the last thing I'm gonna do to this skull is a bit of like small detail. So like the little bumps and crevices, like the tiny ones. So what I'm gonna do is duplicate this brush. I'm just gonna call it noise or something. Doesn't matter. Just gonna turn the size up again already. And I'm gonna hide the mirror, or I'm gonna disable the mirror. I'm just gonna make this smooth or smoother, doesn't really matter. I'm gonna get this, I'm gonna make a texture, and then I'm actually gonna import or open a texture. I will also link that in the description so you can use the same that I'm using. Alright, so now that I've loaded this texture in here, just enable rake and random. and set the angle to a 360. And just looking at this, this is way too strong right now, of course. I'm gonna just increase the size a bit, or maybe not. But I'm gonna turn the strength way down. Maybe not quite that much. Just so we get something like this, so like some small noisy detail. Just as a base, and then just looking at the reference where this noise actually appears on the skull. So I know that I want something right here. And just across the model overall a bit. And by the way, I'm holding control, so this brush is inverted. So it might even look pretty good if you didn't use the inverted version of the brush, but I like to do it with the inverted brush. By the way, don't worry about if you get like streaky things like that. Don't worry about that, because that can actually look good, even though it might not look good in the moment. But that usually ends up looking nice, even though you might not expect it. At least I find that those kind of mistakes, or whatever you want to call them, can look really good later on. So I'm gonna just get another texture now. And that would be, let's see, which one do I want to use? Maybe this one, which does a bit of a harsher detail. And I want to get that going. Might just turn on the strength of that a bit. And I want to introduce that in a few parts, in a few areas. Just for a bit of variation. Maybe actually a bit stronger. You know, degrade some of these parts a bit. This is gonna help with asymmetry too, to get the skull not looking exactly symmetrical. Something like that. And speaking of, I'm gonna just move some parts of the nose without symmetry. So there's a bit of variation in that too. Again, I'm mostly doing the inverted version, so another way you could change this would be up here. No, I'm lying to you right now. This would be here, add or subtract, and I'm subtracting most of the time by holding control in my case. But sometimes I'm also adding to it, like in this case, get a bit more bumpiness going in some spots. I'm just going to load one more texture, and there will be a like a kind of like a scratch texture or a crack. I'm going to use that crack to accentuate a few more parts, and I'm actually going to change this now. Over in the settings, I'm going to change that to stencil. So I have this view now, and I can also rotate that here. And I just want to rotate this a bit. I'm going to work on this here a bit. Alright, so next I'm gonna make some teeth. And to do that, I'm just gonna get a cube. And I'm gonna subdivide that cube. And just get it in front here. And then I'm just gonna focus on the cutting teeth, making the cutting teeth in front. I'm just gonna increase that by a bit. Scale this part on the Y. And again, I'm looking at some reference again. A lot of these skulls have a lot of missing teeth, and might end up doing that for this one too. But I'm gonna start by sculpting all the teeth first, or making all the teeth at least. And then can still remove them later if we want to. And then the next one after that is kind of similar, except that's a bit more stubby usually. And maybe actually a bit wider at the base here. Something like that. Then maybe a bit more like outward facing like that. And then a bit smaller. So what I'm gonna do now is just combine all of them into one object by hitting Ctrl J in my case. I'm gonna apply all transforms as well, and then I'm gonna mirror them. And actually after doing that, what I'm gonna do is separate every second one again. This will come in handy for remeshing in a minute. So I'm gonna just separate these. So every second one. And then what I'm gonna do is, actually I'm noticing that this won't really fit too well. I'm just going to apply these modifiers now. And I'm also going to separate this tooth just so these won't touch at all. Because now that I'm going to put on this remesh modifier for these, they would actually merge if they were too close together. So that's what I want to avoid by separating these. So I'll get it to roughly that, and then by actually selecting all the others and this one as the active, and then if I had Control L in my case and link or copy the modifiers, I can get the same modifier onto all the other So it's copying the modifier from the active to all the other meshes. And then I'm just going to apply all of those. I'm just going to also join them up again after doing the remesh modifier. Because now the modifier part is done, they won't merge anymore. I'm just going to make sure this is shading smooth too. So those would be the base meshes for the teeth. And just making sure that all transforms are applied again. And then I'm going to go to scope mode. And just continuing with the sculpting. I'm just going to switch this here back to smooth in the regular draw brush, and I'm also going to enable mirror again. I'm just going to keep this mirrored for now, and then I'm going to just work on the tips of the roots here, or on the bases of the roots. Okay, one more thing I'm just gonna do is I'm gonna scale each of them down by a bit. Because I'm noticing... Oh, by the way, if you enable mirror in scope mode, at least in the newer versions, it's also gonna enable it in edit mode. I'm not sure why they do it like that, but I definitely don't want it in this case. I'm just gonna scale each individual one down. Alright, so this is going to conclude the sculpting part of the process, and next will be retopology. Alright, I'm just going to explain a bit about retopology. So as of now, this model is really high poly. You can see it down here, it has 1.2 million faces, over 1.2 million. So, I mean, this is usable, at least in Blender, but if you want to, for example, export this into a game engine or do anything else efficiently with it, it's a good idea to do something called retopology. So that gets the model much less higher poly count and much easier to render for any 3D software, basically. So that's what we're gonna do now. So to get started, I'm just gonna get a plane. And I'm just gonna move that over to one side. By the way, I didn't move the plane in object mode. I made sure to keep the origin at the center, or at the exact same place that the skull is. This is gonna become relevant in a minute. So I'm just gonna get the plane close to the skull here by moving it over here, scaling it a bit. And I'm already gonna enable this little icon here, and I'm gonna switch this to face. I'm also gonna enable face project and rotate and scale down here. So this causes, or this enables us to snap this face or any geometry that we change in edit mode onto the skull itself. So now that's the first step. The second step would be to add a modifier to this. Now I'm going to start with a mirror modifier, and this is again going to be mirrored on the X. I'm also going to enable clipping. This makes sure that in the center of the mirror, these faces are always going to merge in the middle. You can't see it that well just yet, but this is going to become a bit more apparent later. So the next step after that is to add a subdivision surface. I could leave it at Catmull Clark, but I'm just going to switch it to simple because I find this works really well, at least for me. And the next step would be to add a shrink wrap modifier. And I'm going to set the target as the cube. I'm also just going to rename this to sculpt. So selecting the plane that we're going to work with, and I'm going to select this sculpt. What this is going to do, this is going to project the Retopology mesh onto the skull, in addition to this magnet thing up there. So I'm also going to switch this to target normal project. I'm going to switch it to above surface here. And let's see, maybe switch this or set this to like a millimeter offset. One thing that is going to help as well is to go here, switch the object color to object, and then I'm going to just rename this to Retopology. And down here in the object, after selecting Retopology, you can go ahead and go to viewport display and change the color. I'm just going to change that to green, just so we're able to see the Retopology mesh a bit better while working with it. Alright, so I'm just going to make sure this has a nice offset, so I'm just going to increase that a bit more. That's a bit much. Maybe something around 0.005. I think that's quite nice. Maybe a bit less. I'm just going to say 0.003. And there we go. So this is the basic setup for a Retopology workflow. I'm also just going to enable this here, which actually makes these modifiers visible in the edit mode, so you can directly see what they are doing and actually manipulate that too in edit mode. Alright, so this is the basic setup for Retopology. And I'm just gonna extrude this face out. And I like to start with looping shapes, like this eye, for example. And one thing that really helps is to make these looping shapes an actual loop. So what I'm gonna start doing here is scale this up a bit maybe. And then I'm just gonna start tracing the edge of the eye, basically. I also want to keep this efficient though, so I'm gonna keep these faces fairly big. And from here I'm just gonna, I'll scale it a bit more maybe. And then I'm just gonna keep extruding around this eye. So that's what I want to do right now, because this is gonna create a loop, which is helpful for later, for unwrapping and just overall flow of the geometry, for the lack of a better term. So just continuing around the eye, basically. Just gonna extrude this one more time here, and then just keep going around the eye, just like that. So making sure I follow the shape. And this is generally a good idea of how to do Retopology, as well for other sculpts and objects as well. So later I'm also going to follow the nose, although I'm going to do this a bit different because this is asymmetry. But you know, for shapes like this, so you want to follow the contours of meshes. This helps with staying sane as well, is what I found, staying sane while doing Retopology, because it can be tricky to know where to start, but by just tracing the outlines of loops, there's something to get started with. Also, so now I have made this loop around the eye. I'm just gonna select this whole edge around here now and have a look down here. So we're looking at 11 vertices right now, which means this is uneven, which is going to make it trickier for us to fill this in here, basically, because this is uneven. It's generally a good idea to keep stuff even, keep it in, or keep these loops an even number of vertices. Although you can also do because this is always going to result in either an n-gon or a triangle later on. Although this is fine too, because the subdivision surface, the subdivision modifier knows how to work with that. But it can still be good practice to keep this, keep these numbers even. This can help. So in my case, I'm gonna say I'm gonna just add one more to keep this even. So I'm gonna add one more here, and then. So looking at this loop cut again, we can see this is even now. This is 12 vertices. So this is going to help in a minute, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Before I continue with the eye, though, I'm going to just take this here. I'm just going to trace this part here, this little crevice that we made earlier. So I'm going to just... although I'm going to keep this a bit simpler, this doesn't need to be traced all that much. So this is all about just like, you know, basically wrapping a lower poly mesh or a lower resolution mesh around the scope mesh and trying to capture as much detail while doing that as possible, while keeping the poly count or the resolution as low as possible. I think that's a good way of saying it. So I just traced this, also making sure that this loop is even again. It's not even right now. So what I'm gonna do is actually remove one edge here in this case. I'm just gonna move this back a bit here. Maybe actually not here. I'm gonna undo that. I'm gonna remove it here instead. And then this is even here. This loop cut is now even. And I'm gonna just extrude this down here, matching this shape up a bit more. And I'm gonna connect these two. And then this is a... oh, this is actually an n-gon, never mind. I'm gonna connect these two instead. And then this is a quad, I can also just fill this in. And I'm gonna connect... well, Blender doesn't really want to help me here. Never mind, that's on me. I'm gonna just connect this here and that. And this can get messy, as you can see right now. Just trust the process. is what I can say to that. You know, this can get pretty messy, but just connecting quads and making sure that these loop cuts have even numbers. That can definitely help if you want to avoid making triangles or n-gons. I think having n-gons of like 5 vertices is actually not a big deal. That usually turns out pretty well. But yeah, this is just... I guess this is like old practice to keep things quad. Like to keep it even, but... it works without that too. But I thought I would mention it because it can be good practice to keep things quad topology, as they call it. Alright, so now that we kept both of these loops even, all this should also be even. So yeah, we're looking at 20 vertices here. So I'm just gonna keep extruding inside here. So no matter what I do in here now, as long as I keep the topology quad in here, so 4 vertices each, and as long as I don't add any loop cuts out here, which I'm not gonna do, then this is gonna stay even, and it's gonna you're gonna be able to connect all of this without creating triangles or n-gons. Right. I hope this made any kind of sense to you. I know I used a whole bunch of technical terms just now, but I hope you were somewhat able to understand what I'm saying. Again, this is my first tutorial, so also feel free to ask questions in the comments. So we're looking at 9 here. I mean, this is another thing. I just created another loop here, which is uneven now, but this can change in just a minute. I'm gonna just dissolve this then. So this is gonna be even now. Just gonna connect that, and I'm also just gonna drag this out a bit more, and then I'm just gonna connect these here, just like that. Alright, moving on. I just realized that the nose might actually be symmetrical enough to do this with a mirror modifier, so I'm just gonna have a look at that. And this is gonna go in a similar way to how we just made the eyes. Just following the outline of the nose, basically. And then I'm just gonna do the teeth. And this is gonna be like a similar story where I'm gonna outline every tooth socket. By the way, merging vertices can be really helpful. I'm actually not sure what the hotkey is, but you can search for merge. What is it? Merge. It's called merge. It's just called merge, and I like to. You can right-click things and add them to the quick favorites, and just access them from here. I use that all the time when editing, and then you can just hit Q. I think that's what the common favorite hotkey is, and then just merge vertices. That's a really useful thing for the edit mode. So this stuff down here is still a really high poly, but we can decimate this a bit by, let's see, what shall we do? Could, for example, merge them up like that. Connect it there. Something like that. That works. So this is another interesting part. So this bridge is basically like a fancy sausage, is what I like to say. So it's a good idea to make two kinds of loop cuts in this case. I'm gonna show you what I mean. So I'm gonna get this wrapping around like this. Oh, by the way, if you're struggling with like these kind of tight spaces, you can go to View up here and change this to something like 20 maybe. Gives you a wider view. This can really help. Right. Just connect this here. Like that. So we made a loop cut like that. Actually, gonna add a bit more geometry to that. Or actually, I'm gonna change that. So this is another interesting lesson to be learned. It took me a while to learn that too. So in this case, keeping a face up here. I'm gonna have another face down here to follow that edge. Up there and down here. And then, sure, one face here and there. And sure, for continuity, I'm gonna make two here as well. So this should also be even. This is 6 vertices. And so we got a loop cut, or we got a loop, goes all the way around here. And then it's a good idea to keep going like that. So I'm just gonna do this upper edge now. Let's extrude that a few times. Like that. And so this is 4 faces now. I'm gonna do the same down here. Two. Let me get this a bit wider here. And number 3 and a 4th one. And then it's a good idea to connect those with those 4 uppers. So to keep this loop going basically, or to keep it in line with what is happening up there. I'm just gonna connect that. You can also, once you connected the last one, you can also select this whole loop, then hit Control F in my case. Oh, it doesn't want to do it. I did something wrong. This is 3. Oh yeah, of course, I'm gonna just add another loop cut here because there's also one here. That makes a whole lot of sense. And then you can like select this whole loop cut and then grid fill with Control F in my case with my shortcuts. And there you go. So this way, this mesh is continuous and there's no weird loop errors going on, which that's definitely a mistake I used to make a lot, is to create a big mess without any continuous loop cuts. It doesn't always work that way, but the more you practice, the easier it will come in most cases. I mean, this is, even though the shape looks weird, this is still a pretty, this is basically just a sausage. And if you realize that this is basically just a sausage in disguise, that helps with realizing how to do retopology best in this case. I hope that makes sense. Right, I'm just gonna continue up here. when you're a bit further along in the retopology process, it can happen that when selecting a vertex, sometimes Blender decides to select a vertex on the other side of the mesh where there's also some geometry. So noticing that can be can be helpful, because otherwise you're gonna end up moving something on the other side of the mesh. So making sure that you select the thing that you actually wanted to select before moving it can prevent, you know, messing up stuff on the other side without, you know, without actually wanting that. So just something to keep in mind. I'm working pretty fast, so this video doesn't literally take hours and hours, even though it's probably gonna take around 3 hours, but I hope you're able to achieve something similar. One common mistake I definitely used to make is getting confused, extruding an edge like that, then cancelling the movement, for example, and then like forgetting about it. So realizing that you might have overlapping geometry is a big one. There is actually also a or a function for that, which is called merge by distance. So if you're unsure if you still have overlapping geometry, you can always search for by distance and then merge that. And in this case, it didn't actually do it. Oh, great. Oh yeah, that's because I didn't select it. So you actually gotta select the whole mesh. And if I do now by distance, it actually merged 3 vertices. It shows it down here, so it merged these that otherwise might have gone unnoticed. I'm also doing my best to keep the poly count as low as possible, so whenever I see the chance to reduce an edge like this, here for example, then I'm gonna do it, like, you know, not unnecessarily keep extruding this further out, but, you know, to merge stuff and to keep an overall idea about the density of the mesh. Alright, and at the end of that, you hopefully have something resembling this. Or at least your version of it. So that's the main part of the skull done. Now there's just the teeth left, which is what I'm gonna do next. Now this can get a lot simpler than the other retopology process. What I might just do is get a cube again and give that just a simple subdivision modifier. Maybe with a level of 2. And then I'm just gonna turn this off up here, the magnet thing. I'm gonna roughly scale that to the point where it matches up this shape of one of the teeth. Also do that in edit mode to match it up as closely as you can. And from here I can say, I'll just apply at least the scale. Maybe scale this a bit more on here, alright. And then from there I can say, I want to get another shrink wrap modifier. Again, gonna say target normal project above surface, and I'm gonna select the teeth and set the offset a bit higher, and that looks pretty alright to me. I can go ahead and scale this a bit further in object and edit mode. And there we go. Now I think I'm just gonna repeat that process for all the others. I know this is a bit messy, but it works. I'm just gonna hide that for now. At least the shrink wrap. I'm just gonna move that over to the next tooth and just move and scale it into place until it fits. And then enable that shrink wrap modifier again. By the way, by hitting scale with S and then double tapping an axis, you can scale it on the local axis of the object if you haven't applied the rotation. This can be really helpful. Specifically in this case. There we go, that's the second one. Let me just compare this. Yeah, this is gonna be nice, I think. I'm talking about the poly count of these teeth retopology meshes. And there we go. I'm just gonna keep doing that for every tooth. So that way the retopology process for the teeth is a lot simpler than going over all that manually. Oh. Now we have the case that it's actually clipping onto other teeth. So to fix that, I'm just gonna go back to object mode and I'm gonna again separate every second tooth. Let me actually do what I said. And so just like that, and then P separate selection. And so, just making sure, so we got scoped, or we got teeth 1 and 2 now, or 001, anyway. Just making sure that I still got the right thing selected here. That's not the case for this one, now it is. And just making sure that's still the right mesh for everything. So this is cube. This is gonna get teeth 1 now. So this way I'm preventing the meshes from clipping onto the other teeth. Alright, and that seems pretty good to me. So once all that is done, I'm just gonna hide the sculpted teeth again. And I'm gonna apply every single modifier of every single tooth. And then I'm gonna just select all of them and combine them. And those should be nicely retopologized teeth now. So we can later project all that detail. This is, by the way, this is the next step. I'm gonna explain more of that in a minute. But those will be the teeth retopo. And then we get the other retopology and the teeth. Now this is not mirrored yet, of course. Just gonna do that. I'm gonna just add another mirror modifier. Get that onto the other side. By the way, I'm also gonna apply all transforms so that mirrors properly. I don't want that to merge. And there we go. Let me shade both of that smooth. And then just have a look. Before I apply that mirror modifier, I guess this is already the next step. Before I apply this modifier, I already want to go into edit mode. And I want to unwrap these. So I'm gonna just select each of these edges here, or these corner edges. I'm gonna do that for every single tooth. As well as at the top. By the way, the shortcut I'm using is Shift and Alt. It might be different for you. Again, I'm not sure because I'm using an older keyboard layout of Blender, so... But this is a shortcut for selecting an entire edge loop, basically. And I'm also selecting these vertical ones now, that connect to the edges. And then one more, which would be this one here. So the one that connects up to the edges up top here. And then by marking that with a seam, Control E. And then I'm gonna just unwrap that. Drag out this window here and just have a little look. I'm gonna enable stretch up here. And there we go. Those are some nicely unwrapped teeth. And now I'm actually going to apply the mirror. And there we go. Those teeth are already unwrapped. I'm just going to hide the skull, the sculpt again. So, oh, by the way, we still got the Boolean shapes here from the sculpting. I'm just going to move those, or might as well just delete those. Okay. So Retopology is done. I'm just going to duplicate that really quick, but not move it at all because that's gonna destroy it. And then I'm gonna move that duplicate to a collection called backup, just in case. I'm just gonna hide that collection and then go back to the original Retopology. And now it's on to unwrapping that. So I'm not even gonna apply any of this yet. I'm just gonna go ahead and make some loop cuts. This is where these loop cuts come in handy here that we made earlier. And I'm also just going to select around the nose, just like that. Yeah, that seems pretty good to me. I'm going to mark those already. And then I'm going to go along jaw right here, the outside of the teeth. Just mark all that. And let's see. I'm just gonna mark that already. Right, I definitely want to separate those holes, so I'm going to make a loop cut right here. And then just from here to there, as well as in the front, which is already the case, I'm also going to go up here in the middle. Mark that. And then we get basically those two tunnels isolated with seams. And those will need another loop cut down here. Or sorry, another set of seams down here. That's where I'm gonna make those. So by doing that, I basically isolated those two tunnels from the rest of the mesh, and I made another cut right here, so these can fold up nice or fold open nicely. Which you can see here. This is only showing one right now because it's still mirroring it, so there's only one of them actually in existence as of now, but this will change when the mirror is applied. Which I'm actually gonna do in a minute, because there's some asymmetrical stuff that I want to unwrap as well. Alright, so I'm gonna just make a loop cut right here as well. As well as I'm gonna also relieve some tension by selecting these here, also marking those. So I know that this is gonna unwrap well already, so I'm already gonna hide these by pressing L to select those, as well as the eye sockets. Although for the eye sockets, I'm also gonna make another loop cut right here. And that should unwrap nicely as well. There we go. Now I'm just gonna select all those that I've already marked, and I'm gonna hide them, just for clarity, just for visual clarity, just to see what I've already unwrapped. Now I want to do this bridge already, so I'm gonna do that liberally. I'm gonna just select around here, maybe go along here, maybe a bit less. I'm gonna just go up right here, mark that, and similar thing in the back here. I think I'm just gonna go around here, go up here, to make a loop here and there in the front. I'm gonna mark those, and then I want to make a loop cut from down here all the way over to here. Mark that. So we've isolated this bridge, also made a loop cut down here, and now when I select only this part and unwrap it, this works very nicely. So I'm also gonna just hide that now, and this is pretty much everything symmetrical. So what I'm going to do now is apply the mirror modifier to then be able to work. By the way, let me just hide that again. To then work for the other with the other shapes. So I'm going to just continue selecting stuff down here. I'm going to isolate this jaw section. Gonna go up here in there. So this is 3 up from there. I'm gonna do the same here. And then go in here, select that. Mark that. And this should be able to unwrap pretty well down here. So if I do that, this is alright. It shows a bit of green, but this will be even better once the subdivision modifier is applied. I'll just deactivate the face orientation again. So I'm just gonna do that for now. Just unwrapping this part on its own. That should be just fine. And from here, this is gonna not work well as it is right now. It's gonna stretch a lot. Although this is better than I would have thought. To improve this even more, you can release some tension by introducing another cut like that. So that way this is able to open up a bit more. And I might actually extend that a bit further and see how the unwrapper likes it. I'm just gonna go a bit further. Maybe even more. And yeah, this seems pretty good. I'm just gonna keep going, see how it turns out. Although I don't want to go that far. Alright, I think I'm gonna call it there. I don't want to go further to the front, just to hide that seam a bit more. I'm actually thinking about, I'm just gonna get rid of the last one here again. This should be fine. One additional thing that might help is selecting these here to free up this, to disconnect these two things so this hole can open up a bit further. There we go. Alright, I'm just gonna unwrap everything as it is. And then just to check, I'm gonna get a new image. I'm gonna say this is gonna be a 6K. I'm gonna make that 6K. You can type in ×6. And then I'm gonna make it a color grid. And specifically color grid because I wanna see how the stretch actually translates to a texture. So I'm just gonna go back to object mode, still keeping the retopology selected. I'm gonna give it a new material, and I'm gonna call this, I usually call it work, because this is the work material, where I'm gonna work on the textures. So I'm gonna get the 6K down here. Oh, by the way, one thing to do before continuing, I'm already gonna prepare this for texturing later. This will become apparent later. I'm gonna explain more about this. I'm gonna turn this to all the way black, as well as turning roughness all the way to 0. This is gonna help later for baking the textures. Alright, I'm just gonna select this to base color now. I'm also gonna get a value to make this more rough for now. Just like that. Okay, so looking at this in Eevee, I'm also gonna turn this back up to 1. And as you can see, the stretch is pretty alright. There's a bit of stretch down here, but this is totally fine. This will be fine. Just gonna turn the view back up to 50. And there we go. Now unwrapping is not completely done just yet. Because the teeth are still missing. Speaking of missing teeth, I'm gonna see how many I actually want to keep and how many I want to delete. So I'm gonna go back and look at the reference and actually see. I'm gonna just hide the retopology again. Actually, before I do that, let me just apply the subdivision modifier on the skull retopology and also the shrink wrap. So all modifiers. And then I'm gonna re-unwrap that after combining the teeth with the actual skull. So all the retopology is now combined with one object. I'm gonna go to edit mode and I'm gonna make sure everything is unhidden. And then I'm gonna unwrap everything angle based. And there we go. I'm just gonna have one more look at the 6K again. Oh, by the way, it created a new texture slot while combining the teeth with the skull, so I'm just gonna get rid of this slot to make sure that the material's on everything here. This object only has one material. And just having another look. This looks pretty nice. There's no excessive stretch, so this is gonna work just fine. And there we go. So now I'm just gonna go back to the sculpt. And I'm just gonna have a look at the teeth. I'm gonna combine them again. And then I just wanna have a look at how many I want to delete. I think I want to get rid of the front row for the most part. I might get rid of this one edge tooth here. I'm just going to get rid of those two here. Let me just hide them to preview that. Nice, I think that looks pretty good. A lot more realistic than if all teeth were just still in their sockets. I'm gonna just delete one more back here. Yeah, I think this is nice. So just unhiding those, and I'm actually gonna, well, instead of deleting them, I'm just gonna separate them. And I'm gonna move them to backup to the collection we just made. And I'm also gonna get the Retopology mesh and do the same for those teeth. So I'm just gonna select those. Which ones did I take? It's this one and this one, as well as these two here. I'm also gonna separate them and move them to backup. And there we go. So that would be the final Retopology mesh and the final scope mesh. Except that I still want to combine the teeth with the actual main skull. So this is only one object now, which is just what we want. And the Retopology mesh is also just one object, everything combined. Alright, so moving on to texturing now. I'm gonna just disable wireframe again, make things looking a bit nicer. I'm also gonna hide the Retopology for now. I'm just gonna prepare the sculpt for texture baking. I'm not only gonna bake the normal onto the Retopology mesh, but I'm also going to bake ambient occlusion, which is gonna help with texturing later. I'm also gonna show you how to bake the edge. I will show you what that means in a minute. So I'm gonna get an ambient occlusion node. Then I'm gonna get a color ramp, and I'm gonna connect it like that. Combine that. And I'm gonna go into this mode, which I have set to cycles. So I'm gonna get to cycles to get a proper look at this ambient occlusion. I'm gonna switch these two around to get a nicer view. I like to bake the ambient occlusion inverted to get a better look at that. So this is looking pretty good to me already. I might just turn this down to like half of it, or to even 0.3 maybe, just to get a bit of value on those crevices. That's really what I'm after. I think 0.3 is gonna be nice. That's gonna work just fine. So additionally, I want to get a geo node, a geometry node, not that one. This one. Didn't even know that there was another geometry one. Oh, never mind, I just hit. Anyway, I have no idea what I just did. Anyway. We want to get a geometry node, and then I'm going to also get another color ramp. I'm going to connect the pointiness to the color ramp to the surface for now. And then I'm going to slide this to roughly 0.5. So you can see this now highlights the edges. This can be really useful for texturing when you want to mask for the edges of an object, for example, to introduce some scratches on the edges or what have you, you know? This can be helpful as a mask. So I'm gonna just increase that a bit more. Maybe down a bit more, something like that. I'm gonna increase the contrast here by sliding the white slider a bit further. I might not even use this edge for texturing in this tutorial, but I just wanted to show you how you can also bake the edge in addition to the ambient occlusion, because these two can be really helpful for texturing. So this is looking pretty alright to me. So to bake that later, I'm gonna just move these here for now. Also making sure that this is at 0 and this is at 0 too. Because I've noticed that baking like that is a lot more accurate than if you had like another value here, for example. I had to painfully figure that out myself. So I'm just gonna keep these two nodes disconnected for now. because I'm first gonna bake the normal map. And I'm gonna bake it selected to active. So I'm gonna select the scoped, and then I'm gonna select the retopology mesh. I'm gonna just reapply all transforms for both of them. And I'm gonna make a new texture. 6K was pretty high resolution. I'm gonna call it normal bake. And I'm not gonna make it 6K, but I'm gonna make it 4K. And I'm also gonna make it blank. Let me actually spell normal properly. And I'm gonna get it down here. And I'm also gonna already make an AO texture. Keeping it blank, moving it down here. And I'm also gonna make an edge. Moving it down here. And I'm gonna make all of those non-color down here. Now I'm gonna keep the normal texture selected in here. And I'm gonna go over to this render tab. I'm gonna just set the render to 64 because I think this still has an impact on the sample count while baking a texture. At least this used to be the case. I know cycles changed so much over the years that this might not even be relevant anymore, but anyway, so I'm gonna just go down here to bake and I'm gonna select normal. And I'm gonna keep everything as it is except for selected to active. And we're talking about a pretty big object, so we can select extrude, which is gonna help. So this object is pretty big. We're talking about like a 2 meter wide object. This is absolutely huge right now. So I'm gonna just set the extrusion to something like 0.5, which is about 5 centimeters. Ray distance can stay like that. So making sure selected to active is checked, and let's have a look. Again, making sure that this texture is selected, normal is selected here, and then I'm gonna just hit bake. Alright, so having a little look. This is an artifact of two, you can see this has a different color. This is an artifact of baking overlapping meshes here, which is actually not too bad. I mean, this will show up a little bit, but it's usually fine. You can reduce this a bit by turning down this extrusion length. Maybe set it to half that distance, and then rebaking it. Alright, this looks pretty good. Now there's no artifacts on the other parts of the skull. There's no like weird colors showing up here. If there is, then this probably means that you haven't turned up the extrusion high enough. So whenever you see something like this appearing all over the place, it probably means you need to adjust this value. But this is looking fine to me, so I'm just gonna save that texture. I'm just gonna put it into a texturing folder. Just save it as a PNG. And then we can already preview this. Although before doing that, I'm gonna just bake the others. I'm gonna just bake the AO. So before doing that, I'm gonna select the scope mesh again. Connecting this here to the roughness input of the shader. Also making sure that this is connected to the surface. So again, this is in scoped. So this is connected. Now I'm gonna reselect the retopology. So making sure this is the active object. I'm gonna make sure this is selected, the AO texture. I'm gonna switch this to roughness because we connected this in the scoped object to roughness. I'm gonna keep this as selected to active. Everything can stay the same. And I'm also gonna just hit bake again. Alright, and that's also looking pretty good. And I'm also just gonna save this as a PNG. And now for the edge. So I'm selecting that edge already. Going back to the scoped object, selecting that. And then connecting this to the roughness, because this is gonna be the edge. Now selecting the retopology again, making sure both are selected. Retopology is the active. Selecting this texture, keeping this at roughness, and baking again. All right, that's looking sweet too. Also gonna save that. You're probably not seeing the screen that pops up for me where I'm saving it. That's because I'm recording this in OBS and it only records this one Blender window. So I'm just gonna delete the 6K texture. And now we should be able to see the baked maps. So I'm just gonna connect this to a normal map. The baked normal. I'm just gonna turn this up a bit, because the normal tends to bake a bit weak. We're just going to connect this to the normal. And now we should be able to see, if I go to Eevee, I'm just going to get a mix color. I'm just going to connect that here. And there you go. We have successfully baked a normal map from a sculpted object onto a retopology object. There's a bit of an artifact, but you can easily get rid of that. I'm gonna show you how to do that in a minute. So there we go. Comparing this to before, so this is without baking a normal map, and this is with. So I'm just gonna fix this little artifact. I'm gonna go to texture paint mode. I'm gonna select a single image, and I'm gonna select normal bake. And then I'm just gonna select the smear brush. And then I'm just gonna carefully smear this until it doesn't show up anymore. And there we go. Alright, so moving on with texturing. I'm just gonna go ahead and unplug this again. I'm gonna leave the normal plugged in. I'm just gonna move these two back here. And then I'm gonna import another texture. I'm probably gonna end up using 2 more textures, and I'm gonna also link both of those in the description so you can use the same if you want. Alright, so I'm gonna get a utilities. By the way, they changed this too in 5.0 and I'm not too happy about that, but anyway, I'm gonna get a mapping. And I'm also gonna get an input texture coordinate. I'm gonna use why not use the object, sure. And then I'm gonna change this back to box. You could also use UV and leave this as default, but I think I wanna go for this in this case. I'm gonna just connect these two. Connect that to base color. And that's a pretty nice base bone texture. I'll make sure to give you access to that. I'm gonna leave a link so you can download the same if you want to use it. Alright, this is looking pretty good already. Actually surprised by how good it's looking already. I'm gonna just add another node, which is a hue saturation value. And I'm gonna tweak the colors a bit. I'm gonna make it a bit darker. Maybe a bit more. Something like 6. That looks pretty good to me. Maybe a bit more actually. I'll meet you in the middle. Something like that. And I'm also looking at the reference now, so I'm comparing to real bones or real skulls. But this is looking pretty good to me already. So also this is just a diffuse texture, but we can make our own PBR material out of this. So what I'm gonna do first is get a color ramp. Gonna connect that. I'm gonna switch these two around. I'm gonna invert that. And then I'm just gonna preview that straight to the surface. And probably want to tweak this a bit. So bones are generally pretty rough. So maybe if I tweak this a bit. Okay, I'm already gonna plug this into the I'm just gonna connect this back here. Connect this to the roughness. And then just have a little look. I want some shininess because that usually looks pretty good, but keep it at a minimum. Alright, so something like this for a start. I'm gonna just turn this up to like 0.1 or 0.2. Something like this for now. So we have a roughness there already. We can manipulate that further later. And what I'm also gonna do is get another color ramp and connect that to a... They changed this displacement bump and plug that into the height. I'm just going to turn the filter width up to like 2. And I'm going to connect this in between the normal map here and the output. Just to get a bit of extra noise texture from the bone texture. So maybe turn this up to like 3 times that. Yeah, maybe a bit less, maybe 2. Alright. So this is a good base. What I'm already noticing though is that the suture lines look pretty light. And this is where the baked AO comes in handy that we baked earlier. So I'm just going to get that. I'm also going to connect that to a color ramp. And then I'm going to get a color mix node down here. I'm going to switch this to multiply. And then I'm going to plug this down here into the multiply. And I'm going to turn this around because I baked this the other way around. I'm not sure exactly why I do that, but that's just how I like to do it. To bake it the other way around. Alright, I'm just going to tweak this a bit. Just to make those crevices a bit darker. Let's see. Something like that maybe. And this is actually looking pretty good to me. Maybe a bit less for now. I can also turn up the factor here. Maybe something like 0.6 again. Now the bone texture is pretty boring as of now. So what I'm also going to do now is import another texture. Again, I'll link that in the description so you can get the same. So which would be number 2. I'm going to load that in here. I'm also just going to switch this to box. I'm going to just duplicate these two. Connect that here. And I know this is looking a bit messy. I'm going to clean this up just a bit. And then I'm also going to get a... so I want to mix these two textures to get a bit of variety. So what I'm going to use for that is a noise texture. So I'm going to go to texture, get a noise texture. I'm also going to plug this into a mapping node. And then I just want to have a look at it straight up in the surface output. I'm also going to connect this to a color ramp. I'm going to increase the size a bit, so turn down the scale, maybe to 3. I'm going to just tighten this up just a bit, maybe to 3 and let's say 6 here. Actually, maybe a bit less of that. Can tweak this later. Turn this down a bit more, maybe. And turn this down a bit more. We'll see. I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And then I want to use this to mix these two textures. So I'm just going to move some stuff around here. So what I want to do is get another color mix right here. And I'm going to use this noise texture here as the factor. I know this is getting pretty messy here. So I'm going to connect that down here. So tighten things up a bit here. I'm going to connect that here. And never mind, as the factor. I can actually move it up top here. And then I'm going to get the second bone texture that we imported. I'm going to get that down here. And just connect that up here. So we're mixing these two textures, these two diffuse textures, with a noise texture. So, alright, I'm just going to preview that again. I'm going to connect the shader back to the output. And, oh, actually, before I do that, I'm going to just have a look at the second bone texture on its own, to have a look at the scale. Just to see, oh yeah, I forgot to turn this up here. Turn that to 3 as well. And I'm just going to turn down the scale of that a bit. Maybe to like 0.7. Well, maybe up a bit more. Again, I'm comparing to the reference, having a look at how a real bone texture looks like. And this is actually based off of a real bone texture. I'm pretty sure this is a photo scan. And so that looks pretty nice to me. Let me just connect that back up. And now this is mixing based on this noise texture, so based on the black and white values. I'm just gonna tweak that a bit more. I might want to have a bit more of that white. Now I'm also going to take the second bone texture and I'm going to connect that to a color ramp as well. Get it down here and connect it to a bump as well. I'm just going to use the same one from the last one to get a bit of bump out of that too. Maybe actually increase that a bit. Maybe double that. I'm also going to just take the AO. I'm also going to connect that to another color ramp. As you can see, color ramps are really useful. Other people have said it too, but you can do a lot with color ramps. I'm gonna just not invert that because the whites are still... Because I want to use the light colors now from the AO to mix that down at the roughness. I'm gonna switch that to lighten. I'm gonna use that to just make these suture lines a bit more rough, so they are not as shiny as they might be otherwise. I'm just gonna preview that directly into the surface. I'm gonna turn that up, turn the lighten up, and also move these sliders around a bit. Something like that. So just to get a bit more roughness into those crevices. Okay, one more thing I want to do from here is to also connect another color ramp to the second bone texture. And I'm just going to preview that in the surface, and I want to sort of isolate the darks here. So I'm going to turn this up a bit. What I'm looking for is a few dark spots to add onto the surface. So maybe something like that. And then I'm going to introduce another mix node here. I'm just going to get another one here, and I'm going to change that to multiply. I'm going to connect this to here, back to the surface here, and this gives us a bit of more darker spots here to get a bit more interest. Just tweaking that a bit. Comparing before and after. So this just gives a bit more contrast to make it look a bit more interesting. Another thing I'm gonna do is turn up the baked normal map that we made. I'm gonna just turn it up to 2. Let's see what that looks like. It might be a bit on the high end. I'm gonna change it to like 1.6 maybe. And then one idea I actually had for the edge texture, I said we might not even use it, but here it is back here. I'm just going to duplicate that. What you can use this for, as well as, I mean, you can use this to mask shaders, which I might actually show you in a minute. But you can also use this to use this as a factor, for example, to turn up the strength of a normal map too. So again, if you just have a look at this really quick, so we got two values here basically, black and white. So I want to say that for the normal strength, it should usually stay at 1.6, as I've just set the normal map to, and then I want the light parts to be much stronger than that. So I'm going to set that to something like 4 maybe. So you can't actually see it in the output, but this value is now at 1.6, and this light value that you would otherwise be able to see is at 4 now. So we can use this as an input for the strength to make these edges a bit more, a bit stronger. And in this case, it doesn't actually look too good to me, but this is something you can use an edge map for, is to do those kind of things. I might just turn this down to like 3 maybe. Then change this, move this around a bit, comparing it before and after. Yeah, maybe just a bit less. I mean, this was just one idea I had, just to show you what you can do with baked edge textures. Alright, so the next thing to do would be to lighten up the teeth a bit, because the teeth are a bit dark as of yet. So I'm gonna make another texture. I'm gonna call it teeth. Make that 4K. And turn off the alpha. Keep it blank. And I'm also just gonna save that into the texture rig folder that I've made. And I'm gonna change this to non-color data already. Now, I'm not even gonna connect this up yet. I'm gonna just go to the edit mode in the skull. I'm gonna select all teeth. I'm pressing L, by the way, to select an entire mesh. Then I'm gonna go to texture paint. I'm gonna enable this mask up here. Then I'm gonna go here and select the teeth texture and use the bucket. Switch this to white, and I'm just gonna click here to fill this in. Now we masked those teeth. They are white now. And now we can use this texture to lighten up the teeth, basically. Just gonna go back to object mode here and get another color or another mix node. And I'm gonna switch this to lighten and just connect the teeth up down here. Now this is obviously way too bright. I'm gonna just turn this down by a lot. Maybe to something like 1.5. Maybe a bit more. Alright, this is looking really good to me already. I'm just gonna tweak a few things. And then I'm gonna take it one step further in a minute. I'm just gonna increase the multiply from the AO a bit more. Slide that up a bit more. Get a bit more darkness in those crevices. And then I'm also just gonna take down the value of those bone textures a bit more. I'm just gonna switch this to 0.5. I'm also gonna connect another hue saturation value to the second bone texture. Right here. Also just turning that down by a bit. Maybe something like that. Actually, I'm gonna keep it up a bit higher. And there you go. So to take this one step further, I mean, this looks like a pretty good skull to me, but we can take this one step further by introducing some dirt, because this skull looks, even though it is looking pretty rough, but it looks pretty pretty clean still. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna duplicate this shader. I'm also gonna get a mix shader node up here. Just connect that already. And what I wanna do is use the ambient occlusion again, the AO, to mask between two shaders. So I'm gonna connect a color ramp to this AO. And I'm gonna use that to switch between those two. This is a really powerful way to make shaders in general. So you can take this way further with other models, so you can connect up a whole bunch of shaders and also use other masks and edge, for example, to mask between different shaders. So I'm just gonna leave that as it is right now. And I'm gonna get another texture. And this is just a mud or a dirt texture. Again, I'm gonna leave a link to that in the description too, so you can download the same one if you wanna use it. And I'm gonna connect this up to a mapping node as well, and give it an input texture coordinate too. I'm just gonna keep this at UV, connect this up like so. I'm just gonna preview that in the surface output just to tweak the scale a bit, because right now this is looking pretty big. I'm just gonna turn this up to like, I don't know, 3 maybe. Maybe a bit more. That looks pretty good. And I'm just gonna connect that, switch this back here, plug this in straight to the base color here. And I'm just going to use one value here for the roughness. That will do just fine. And I'm going to just connect that to the roughness as well. And just like with the diffuse textures, and just like with the bone diffuse textures, we can turn this into a normal map as well. So I'm going to get a displacement bump, get another color ramp too, connect this up like that, and into here. Also going to turn up the filter width to something like 2, connect this here. And you can see there is some dirt appearing now. So we've masked this with the AO up here with the mix shader. And now this is showing up nicely. I'm just going to turn up the strength to like 3 times that maybe. Maybe a bit more actually. Maybe even more. Double that yet again. And one thing I definitely also want to do is connect this output to this normal as well, to make sure that we get the same normal over here. So I'm gonna get a reroute node, this little pin here. I'm just gonna move that over here and also plug that into the normal right here. So this just makes sure that we get the same baked normal over here in this shader as well. And can now tweak this AO mask a bit to get more or less dirt as we want it. So I don't actually want that much. I'm gonna keep this somewhat low. It's actually looking pretty dark to me, so I'm also gonna input another hue saturation value here and turn this up just a bit, maybe 1.5, maybe 2. Oh, maybe more like 1.7. Turn this back just a bit. There we go. So comparing this to before and after. So we've now made the nooks and crannies a bit more dirty. So I'm gonna call texturing done here now. The next step would be baking those textures onto 3 very simple textures, so we don't have all this mess remaining later. So what I'm gonna do is get more reroute nodes. I'm gonna connect those to these outputs here, to each one. I'm gonna do that on both shaders. Connect all those up, just like so. I'm just gonna go back to shadeless mode. And so the goal with this here is I'm gonna disconnect all of these except for the base color. And this is the reason why I turned all this down to 0 values, because if this was at a value, let's say 0.5, the diffuse map would actually not bake accurately. So for some reason the baker in Blender wants 0 values in both of these inputs. So I'm always making sure that this is at 0 and the roughness too. As well as having everything else unplugged while you bake one texture. So I'm just gonna disconnect all of these, only keeping the diffuse plugged in, or the base color. And I'm just gonna make 3 textures now. I'm gonna call this diffuse skull. Keep all of this at 4K, blank, and new image. Get this down here. I'm gonna make another image called roughness skull. Make that, get it down here. And make another one called normal skull. So we want to bake the diffuse, the roughness, and the normal. I'm going to change the normal to non-color data and the roughness as well. Now making sure that only the diffuse is plugged in up here, and I'm going to select the diffuse, make sure that only the retopology, so this mesh is selected. And we're already down here at the bake, and I'm gonna disable selected to active because we're only gonna bake this one object now, and we want to bake the diffuse first, making sure that this is selected again. Everything else except the base color is unplugged, and I'm only gonna select color here. I'm gonna change the margin to something like 512, And that's it. Let's hit bake. Alright, and this will be a nicely baked diffuse texture. I'm just gonna save this. Now next I'm gonna bake the roughness. So same principle, I'm gonna just connect the roughness, disconnect the base color, plug that in here and disconnect the base color. So we only bake the roughness channel. And then I'm gonna select this roughness texture, switch this to roughness as well, and hit bake. Alright, and that's the roughness done. Also gonna save that as a JPEG. And moving on to the last one, the normal. So again, same thing, I'm only gonna connect the normal here, unplug everything else, and select the normal. Switch this to normal here too, and hit bake. Alright, I'm also going to save this normal map now as a JPEG. And there you go, we've now baked all of this meth down to these 3 textures. So this really helps with efficiency again. So not only have we retopologized the insanely dense sculpt mesh down to this, but we've also baked the material down to these 3 textures. So this is really helpful for getting everything, well, production ready, I guess you could call it. So I'm just going to connect these 3 to another shader now to have a look at the final result. I'm going to get another normal map here. I'm going to increase the strength slightly, maybe something like that, because the normal tends to bake a bit weak. And I'm just going to connect this to the surface output right here. And then we can have a look at it. And there you go. So again, all of this we reduce down to these 3 textures. And there we go. Now this is technically it. There's one more thing. The skull is still giant, so it's still almost 2 meters. Well, it is almost over 2 meters big. So I'm gonna just go ahead and scale this down. So the average size of a human skull is around 17 centimeters in width. So I'm gonna just take that, and then I'm gonna scale this down. Looking at the X, so I want the X to be around 17 centimeters, so 0.7, 0.17. There we go. I'm also gonna position this nicely on the grid floor, on the Y here. Somewhere around that. And then I'm gonna just apply rotation and scale. I'm gonna set the origin to geometry. Or actually, I'm just gonna apply all transforms. There we go. And I'm also just gonna get a floor, so I'm gonna make a plane, scale it up by like 3 times maybe. Call this a floor. Give this a material, just to have a look at our final skull. And there we go. Now, there's one more thing you could do to make this look a bit more realistic maybe. And that would be to give it some subsurface scattering. So I'm gonna just turn this value down to 0.3. Turn up the weight here. And this just gives it a bit more softness. Because bone usually has a bit of see-through. Bit of translucency, I guess you could say, but I'm just gonna turn this down a bit maybe. So comparing to before and after, this just gives it a bit of softness. And there we go, so that's my whole production workflow for sculpted objects, retopology, unwrapping, texturing, and baking. I hope you found this video useful, and thanks for watching.